On November 4th, Darcy Antonellis, the CEO of Vubiquity, led a 1 hour conversation with five USC Cinema and Iovine and Young students. They discussed the state of higher education and how the educational experience could be improved. Here are 12 minutes of the highlights from the session.
What does something like COVID and what has it taught us about how we think about education and the use of technology and media kind of going forward? And I thought that would be an interesting question to pose to to folks like yourself who are living with the realities of it.
I'm really liking the online experience. I think USC has done a terrific job in getting us all together and making us bond, even though we haven't had the opportunity to meet each other in campus. We had an advantage that not all USC students had. We had an interview weekend in February, so we got to meet each other previously to the start of classes, and we did several Zooms like every weekend, just our class because it's a small class of like 30 students, and we take the same courses together. So we got to like bond and meet pretty well with each other. You gain confidence and are able to talk with this group of people you get to know really well. um, but something I have felt that lacked is, for example, body language. I think it's so useful when communicating your ideas. Anything you say, body language helps so much to convey those ideas, and I feel that's something that it's lacking in the online system.
It's been a big change just jumping from high school and now at like being a freshman at USC, and especially the whole online experience. I think collaboration is probably just the biggest aspect that we're definitely missing out on.
I feel it's tiring to be looking at the screen so many hours a day. I try to take breaks like every class, walk a little bit, stretch, I don't know, go and have a cold drink. Universities or schools should try to give like bigger breaks in between classes, like 10 or 5 minutes breaks between classes are not long enough, taking into account that also some classes start a little bit late, so they end a little bit late, and then you finish up having like a 2 minute break to close a Zoom meeting and hop in the next one. Put more effort into promoting like physical activities, events, I don't know, yoga classes, Zumba, to get your body moving and just get your mind out of the computer.
In addition to being a graduate student and going to classes with other graduates, I'm also a teaching assistant for a lot of professors who straddle both the School of Cinematic Arts and the Marshall School of Business. So I'm in contact with a lot of undergraduates. In order to understand a lot of the techniques that we're trying to teach through the camera, it requires a hands-on approach. The problem is now we have to sort of personalize that approach for every single student. We can't gather everyone in the same classroom and just walk through a presentation. What that has resulted, at least with my cohort, is that there's a kind of a DIY attitude going around, which is kind of like we gotta, take ownership of our own education and kind of do it ourselves. We have to, accelerate our own learning, and it's our responsibility to do so. We can't rely so much on USC or teachers to sort of prompt us like we would, naturally if we were on campus. That has, in some ways, I think, increased our tendency to communicate better, ironically, and to support each other perhaps a little bit more.
Especially in production, online learning is just highlighting the technology gap within its students. I'm seeing myself kind of fall behind my peers who do have parents in the industry and access to better technology. And I'm shooting on my iPhone 7. Meanwhile, other students have $2,000 cameras and can afford to rent a lighting setup for a project. Fortunately and unfortunately, a lot of the learning is happening outside of the classroom, learning through internships and working on student sets. There's the optimistic way of looking at it where it pushes your creativity and forces you to emphasize your storytelling skills. That's great, an optimistic way of looking at it, and I do find that to be true, but in the end, that kind of wealth and technology divide is a big issue, especially in the production program.
In the real world, even pre-COVID, there were always kids who could get $10,000 from their parents to get a better setup than, the regular student might have. But there was the equalizing factor, at least, of having access to the school equipment. And now, other than laptops, that's really not available, as I understand it, at all.
The discrepancies have always been there. They've just been catalyzed and exaggerated now because of coronavirus. The way I try to form relationships and like connections these days is a lot more difficult, because whereas you'd be outside of like if social events or mixers like networking and trying to like meet with professionals and stuff like that, that isn't exactly translating the same way when it's just through an online event. And I find it more difficult to gather information and try to connect with people on the same level that I would, because I feel a lot more comfortable speaking to people in person than I do over Zoom. Like the executive boards and the clubs and organizations I'm usually a part of on campus regularly, I find myself lacking motivation to direct them, because while we usually have weekly meetings, I find that people are also less likely to attend those weekly meetings when it's over Zoom.
If there's a silver lining to this, it is that COVID is accelerating something which was already happening in terms of virtual production workflows. It's just happening a lot faster under the necessity. And these are not just workarounds. There are really big companies that are committing hundreds of millions of dollars now to permanent long-term platform solutions like Microsoft, like Adobe, that will eliminate the need for interpersonal physical collaboration for big chunks of the content creation process. If you start to say, how can we minimize physical density wherever possible, all of a sudden people begin to get very inventive and very creative about using these technologies and the cloud and the opportunity to have collaborative relationships. So you're actually on the cutting edge of what I think is going to be the way a lot of stuff gets done going forward. And you're not going to go back to what you may have thought you came to school to learn. You're learning the new normal now.
We're never going to go back to people having to be and go to an office or working in a facility 5 days a week. It just will not happen. Working virtually will be the new norm.
So in terms of like distance, you're able to connect with people that otherwise it would have been really complicated to get to USC or to the university to actually talk to us. So in that aspect, I think some classes have benefited from this situation and it will stay that way.
So I feel like one of the biggest successes that I've seen actually happened in one of my GE classes, where it is a hybrid model between like live lectures where we all go onto Zoom and she speaks versus a pre-recorded lecture that's asynchronous. And personally, I find myself learning a lot better with the pre-recorded lectures, although that is counterintuitive because then you don't even have a real-time connection with others. But because those asynchronous lectures are scripted, and by scripted, I mean the professor basically has everything written out that she's going to say, and then she reads it, and therefore it's very clear and concise, and she gets to the point, and the pacing is exact, versus, as you're lecturing, you sometimes tend to ramble and go back to points and forget them, and just the way humans speak is naturally imperfect. And that's because it is engaging in the same way the documentaries are engaging. They have pre-planned visuals. They aren't just scrolling through a PowerPoint. They insert clips, they insert graphs. It's visually very easy to read because there's been a team that's decided, yes, this is what your eye's going to go to because I put that in bigger font, versus just the typical black letters on a white PowerPoint scrolling through with a professor rambling for 2 hours. I feel when it's concise and confined to a certain amount of time, that's when I feel like a lot of people, both they retain the information better because it's presented in a much easier and more accessible fashion, and two, it just get it better when you have visuals that are going to perfectly correspond with what they're going to say, because there has been that editing process.
I completely agree with everything you just said. And I find it a little ironic, actually, that because now we are engaged with visual media on an even more saturated level, that our education isn't as media literate as we'd like it to be, because it's not taking full advantage of what media can do and what it can teach us.
I'm taking like a freshman GSM, so it's a pretty small class still. But what the professor is doing is that she lectures for like 30 minutes, and then the next 30 minutes of the class, she sends us to breakout rooms to respond to certain discussion prompts. So we're talking over in groups of like 3 people, what she just spoke about. So to me, it has helped me a lot to retain the information because I have to remember what she has said to then be able to talk it over with my peers.
When we go into breakout rooms, we feel like a need to talk to, talk to other people in the breakout rooms and kind of collaborate and do all of that group-based learning that has, that it should be promoted, especially in this online environment. Just, one, to make connections and grow your network, to get people to know them, to get people to know each other better, as well as kind of to promote that group-based learning where you can not only learn from online resources and what you learn in class, but also, from other people, which I feel like is super important going into the industry where everything is very collaborative most of the time.
As someone who uses Duolingo, one of the things I really appreciate about it is how it gamifies learning in a sense. And that definitely helps me retain the information far better. It creates it creates that interactive experience again, where I feel like I'm accomplishing something almost like I'm playing a video game, but I'm actually gaining something more while I'm involved with it.
I know this is a bit far-fetched, but any type of like in like the far future, if we can use like virtual reality as a tool, the way they've already been used in like some classrooms have like virtual classrooms where you actually feel like you're more in place, where you can actually see a professor even if he's not there.
Guys, it's gonna happen. You got to change all your techniques. You got to think ahead because entertainment is gonna be completely different in a virtual reality world. I mean, we complain about alternate realities and fake news now, but going beyond people just picking the facts they want, they can pick the worlds they want to inhabit. There's going to be a lot of consequences about technological advancement going ahead that would be wise to start considering now.